When most people think about empaths, they imagine someone who gives endlessly, someone who listens for hours, forgives repeatedly, and remains available no matter how many times they are disappointed. Society often praises this kind of behavior as proof of love. But psychologically speaking, this is where many empaths unknowingly create the very dynamic that keeps them trapped with avoidant individuals. Avoidants are not typically overwhelmed by love itself. They are overwhelmed by what love requires. Genuine intimacy demands vulnerability, accountability, and emotional presence. Those are the exact areas where many avoidants feel the most discomfort. As a result, they often develop strategies that create distance whenever a relationship begins to feel too close. What many people don't realize is that chasing an avoidant rarely creates attraction. It creates predictability. And once a person becomes predictable in their pursuit, they stop being seen as a valuable choice and start being viewed as a guaranteed resource. The avoidant learns, consciously or unconsciously, that no matter how much distance they create, the empath will close the gap for them. This is why the empath who refuses to chase becomes such a powerful force in an avoidant's life. Notice that refusing to chase is not the same as refusing to care. These are completely different things. A mature empath still feels deeply. They still care deeply. They still understand other people's pain. The difference is that they no longer allow compassion to override self-respect. This distinction changes everything. When an avoidant withdraws, the average person often interprets the distance as a problem to solve. They send more messages. They offer more reassurance. They try harder to prove their value. But the self-respecting empath understands something important. Connection cannot be negotiated through pursuit. Real connection requires mutual participation. Instead of chasing, they remain grounded. Instead of panicking, they observe. Instead of abandoning themselves to keep someone else comfortable, they maintain their own emotional stability. From a psychological perspective, this creates a completely different experience for the avoidant. Suddenly, the usual pattern stops working. The emotional tug-of-war disappears. The pressure they expected to feel is gone. The desperate pursuit they have become accustomed to is absent. And in that silence, something interesting happens. The avoidant is left alone with their own choices. For perhaps the first time, they are forced to ask questions they normally avoid. Why did this person not chase me? Why do I suddenly miss their presence? Why does their absence feel different from everyone else's? The answer is simple. Because genuine value is often recognized only after it is no longer available on demand. This principle extends far beyond relationships. Human beings naturally become less conscious of what is constantly accessible. We adapt to it. We expect it. We stop appreciating it. But when something meaningful withdraws, awareness returns. The empath who refuses to chase creates this awareness without saying a word. Their power comes from emotional discipline. They understand that love is not proven through endless sacrifice. Love is proven through healthy reciprocity. They know that constantly pursuing someone who is running away is not romantic. It is a denial of reality. And reality always wins eventually. What makes this type of empath unforgettable is not their ability to give. There are many people willing to give endlessly. What makes them unforgettable is their ability to stop giving when the relationship no longer honors their value. That decision communicates something profound. It says, I care about you, but I care about myself too. For an avoidant, this can be a shocking experience, because it challenges a belief they often carry beneath the surface. The belief that intimacy leads to loss of freedom, loss of control, or emotional obligation. The secure empath demonstrates a different truth. They show that love and self-respect can coexist, and that lesson remains long after the relationship changes. The people who leave the deepest mark on our lives are rarely the ones who chased us the hardest. They are the ones who showed us what healthy connection looked like, and then refused to betray themselves when we couldn't meet them there. That's the empath an avoidant never forgets. Because the moment you stop chasing someone who is running away, you stop participating in the cycle. And that is often the moment your true power begins. Once we understand why the empath who refuses to chase becomes so impactful, we can begin to see an even deeper truth. The empath type that affects avoidance the most is not necessarily the one who loves the hardest. It is the one who remains secure while loving deeply. This distinction is critical because many people confuse emotional intensity with emotional strength. They assume that the more they think about someone, the more they sacrifice, or the more pain they endure, the stronger their love must be. But psychological maturity teaches a different lesson. Strength is not measured by how much of yourself you can give away. Strength is measured by how much of yourself you can retain while remaining open-hearted. A secure empath understands this intuitively. They care deeply about others, but they do not make another person's emotional state their responsibility. They can sit with someone's pain without feeling compelled to fix it. They can offer support without turning themselves into a full-time rescuer. And this is precisely what makes them so rare. Many avoidants have spent years encountering two extremes. On one side, they meet people who are emotionally unavailable and detached. On the other side, they meet people who become overly invested and emotionally dependent. Neither experience feels truly safe. The secure empath represents something entirely different. They bring warmth without pressure. They bring understanding without surrendering their boundaries. They offer connection without demanding that someone become a different person overnight. From a behavioral perspective, this creates an environment that avoidants are not accustomed to experiencing. Most avoidants expect relationships to become emotionally chaotic at some point. They anticipate criticism, demands, guilt, or attempts to control them. These expectations often come from past experiences that reinforce the belief that closeness inevitably leads to discomfort. But the secure empath interrupts that expectation. Instead of reacting emotionally to every shift in behavior, they remain centered. Instead of personalizing every withdrawal, they maintain perspective. Instead of interpreting distance as proof of rejection, they recognize that another person's behavior often reflects that person's internal struggles rather than their own worth. This level of emotional stability is incredibly powerful because it removes the fuel that typically keeps unhealthy relationship dynamics alive. Think about it for a moment. If one person constantly seeks reassurance and the other constantly withdraws, both individuals are unknowingly reinforcing each other's patterns. The anxious person becomes more anxious. The avoidant becomes more avoidant. But when a secure empath enters the equation, the cycle begins to change. Their sense of identity does not depend on the relationship. They have goals, passions, friendships, and a life that exists independently of the person they love. They do not wake up every morning wondering how to earn affection. They do not measure their value by someone else's level of attention. As a result, their presence feels different. There is a calmness around them, a confidence that does not need to announce itself, an emotional steadiness that communicates safety. And safety is something avoidants often crave far more than they realize. Many people assume avoidants are running from intimacy. In reality, they are often running from the fear associated with intimacy. They fear being trapped. They fear being judged. They fear losing control. They fear disappointing someone. Underneath many avoidant behaviors is not a lack of feeling, but a fear of what those feelings might require. The secure empath doesn't try to eliminate those fears through persuasion. They eliminate them through example. They demonstrate that healthy connection does not require possession. They show that closeness does not require dependency. They prove that two people can care deeply for one another, without either person abandoning themselves. This becomes incredibly attractive because it challenges the avoidance, existing beliefs about relationships. Suddenly, connection feels less threatening. Emotional closeness feels less overwhelming. Vulnerability begins to seem possible. And even if the avoidant struggles to fully embrace that reality, they remember it. People remember how they felt around emotionally secure individuals. They remember the absence of drama. They remember the feeling of being accepted without being controlled. They remember the freedom to be themselves while still feeling connected. That experience leaves a mark because it reveals a higher standard of relationship than many people have ever encountered. The secure empath teaches an important lesson without ever needing to preach it. They show that love is strongest when it is rooted in wholeness rather than need. They show that connection thrives when both people remain grounded in their own identity. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that the healthiest relationships are not built by two people completing each other. They are built by two complete people choosing each other. Because the moment you stop looking for someone to fill a void and start building a life that reflects your own value, you become the kind of person whose presence changes everyone you meet. As we move deeper into this idea, we arrive at something that many people misunderstand about avoidance. People often assume that avoidants fear relationships. They assume avoidants simply don't want intimacy, don't value connection, or don't experience emotions as deeply as everyone else. But when you look beneath the surface, the reality is usually much more complex. Most avoidants are not running from connection itself. They are running from the vulnerability that connection requires. And this is where the secure empath becomes such a transformative presence. A healthy empath possesses a quality that cannot be faked. They are emotionally available. They are willing to be seen. They are willing to express feelings honestly, communicate directly, and engage with difficult conversations, without turning those conversations into battles. At first glance, this may not seem remarkable, but psychologically, it creates a very unusual experience for an avoidant. Many avoidants spend years protecting themselves through emotional distance. They become skilled at intellectualizing feelings instead of experiencing them. They stay busy. They focus on work. They distract themselves with goals, routines, or independence. Over time, these behaviors become more than habits. They become identity. The problem is that emotional walls do not selectively block pain. They block connection as well. This creates an internal conflict. Part of the avoidant wants closeness. Part of the avoidant fears closeness. Part of them desires intimacy. Part of them associates intimacy with discomfort, vulnerability, or loss of control. The result is often a constant push and pull dynamic. They move toward connection, and then retreat. They open up, and then shut down. They seek closeness, and then create distance. Most people respond to this inconsistency by becoming frustrated. They demand answers. They apply pressure. They try to force clarity. The secure empath takes a different approach. They do not chase emotional disclosure. They do not interrogate vulnerability. They do not attempt to pull emotions out of someone before that person is ready. Instead, they model emotional openness through their own behavior. This is an important psychological principle. Human beings learn far more from observation than instruction. We are influenced more by what people consistently demonstrate than by what they tell us. The secure empath understands this instinctively. They show what emotional honesty looks like. They express needs without shame. They communicate feelings without aggression. They discuss conflict without turning it into a threat. They remain present during uncomfortable moments, rather than avoiding them. And in doing so, they create something incredibly rare: emotional safety. Safety is often misunderstood. Many people think safety means never feeling challenged. In reality, psychological safety means knowing that you can be authentic without fear of humiliation, punishment, or abandonment. For an avoidant, this experience can be profoundly disorienting. Why? Because emotional safety removes many of the justifications they have used to maintain distance. When someone is manipulative, criticism feels justified. When someone is controlling, withdrawal feels necessary. When someone is emotionally volatile, avoidance feels protective. But when someone remains calm, authentic, and emotionally grounded, those defenses become harder to maintain. The avoidant begins to encounter a difficult truth. The barrier is no longer outside of them. The barrier is within them. This realization can be uncomfortable because it forces self-reflection. The secure empath never directly attacks the avoidant's defenses. They don't need to. Their presence naturally exposes them. Think about what happens when you walk into a brightly lit room after spending hours in darkness. The light doesn't fight the darkness. It simply reveals what was already there. Emotional availability works the same way. The secure empath's openness illuminates the gap between the avoidant's desire for connection and their fear of vulnerability. And that gap becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. This is why many avoidants find themselves thinking about emotionally healthy people long after the relationship has changed. It isn't always because of romance alone. It is because that person represented a possibility they had not fully considered. A possibility that intimacy could exist without losing freedom. A possibility that vulnerability could exist without humiliation. A possibility that connection could exist without control. The empath becomes a living example of another way to relate to the world. Whether the avoidant fully embraces that lesson immediately is irrelevant. Seeds planted in the mind often grow long after the conversation ends. People change when they become aware of contradictions within themselves. And few things create awareness more effectively than encountering someone who calmly embodies the qualities we secretly wish we possessed. The secure empath doesn't force transformation. They inspire it, not through pressure, not through persuasion, not through emotional sacrifice, but through consistent authenticity. And that may be the most powerful influence any human being can have on another. Because the greatest catalyst for change is not criticism. It is meeting someone whose example makes you realize that a better version of yourself is possible. And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. The moment that ultimately defines the difference between a secure empath and every other type of empath. It is not how deeply they love. It is not how patient they are. It is not even how much understanding they can offer. It is their willingness to walk away when the relationship no longer honors the values they bring to it. For many people, walking away is viewed as an act of rejection. It is interpreted as anger, punishment, or emotional retaliation. But for the secure empath, walking away is something entirely different. It is an act of alignment. They are not leaving because they suddenly stopped caring. In many cases, they still care deeply. They still see the good in the other person. They still understand the fears, insecurities, and emotional wounds that may be driving unhealthy behavior. But they also understand a fundamental truth about human relationships. Understanding someone does not obligate you to tolerate behavior that consistently damages your well-being. This is where many empaths become trapped. Their ability to understand others becomes so strong that they begin using empathy as a reason to remain in situations that are no longer healthy. They tell themselves they're struggling. They tell themselves they've been hurt before. They tell themselves they don't really mean it. And while those statements may be true, they often distract from a more important question. What is this relationship costing you? Because every relationship has a cost. It costs time. It costs energy. It costs emotional investment. The question is whether that investment is producing growth, connection, and mutual respect, or whether it is slowly draining the person making it. The secure empath eventually recognizes that love without reciprocity becomes self-abandonment. And once they recognize that truth, everything changes. They stop negotiating for basic respect. They stop trying to convince someone to value them. They stop proving, explaining, persuading, and waiting. Instead, they make a quiet decision. They choose themselves. Now, from the outside, this can seem like a simple act. But psychologically, it creates one of the most powerful shifts an avoidant can experience. Remember, avoidants often expect people to keep pursuing them. They expect second chances, third chances, and endless opportunities to reconnect whenever they feel ready. Not because they are malicious, but because the pattern has often worked before. The secure empath interrupts that pattern. For the first time, the avoidant encounters someone who genuinely cared, genuinely understood them, and yet still chose to leave. That experience forces reflection, because suddenly, the narrative changes. The issue is no longer whether the empath loved enough. The issue becomes whether the avoidant was willing to meet that love with equal effort. This is where growth often begins. Not because the empath issued an ultimatum, not because they tried to teach a lesson, but because reality itself became the teacher. Human beings rarely appreciate consequences when they are theoretical. We understand them when they become real. The secure empath, absence transforms what was once a comfortable assumption into a tangible loss. And loss has a unique ability to create awareness. The avoidant begins to remember the patience they received, the understanding they were offered, the emotional safety they experienced, the acceptance they were given. Things that may have been overlooked while they were freely available suddenly become impossible to ignore. Now, it is important to understand that walking away is not a strategy designed to make someone come back. That mindset misses the entire point. If your decision to leave is secretly a tactic to regain control, then emotionally, you are still attached to the outcome. The secure empath does something much more difficult. They release the outcome. They accept that the other person may never change. They accept that reconciliation may never happen. They accept that closure may never arrive in the form they hoped for, and then they move forward anyway. This is true emotional strength. Not controlling another person's behavior, not predicting the future, not waiting for validation, but choosing peace over uncertainty and self-respect over attachment. Ironically, this is often the moment when avoidants feel the full weight of what they have lost. Not because someone chased them, not because someone fought for them, but because someone finally stopped fighting against reality. There is a profound philosophical lesson hidden within this process. Love is not measured by how long you can endure a situation that is hurting you. Love is measured by your ability to remain open-hearted without betraying yourself. The secure empath understands that boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the structure that allows healthy love to exist. And when those boundaries are repeatedly ignored, walking away becomes an act of wisdom rather than surrender. In the end, the empath who leaves with love leaves behind something far more powerful than resentment. They leave behind a mirror that reflects what was offered, what was neglected, and what could have been. And sometimes, the most life-changing message you can send another person is not a text, a speech, or an explanation. Sometimes, the message is simply your absence and the self-respect that made it possible.